on, Dolphins? Back again. I got a couple articles I want to read to you. One is some kind of breaking news about the Dolphins having some interest in a player, a certain player. And then I also have another article to bring to you that brings a little bit more context into this whole greater political ideology that is brought up by this whole national anthem debate right now in the NFL. So to start with, I'm going to go with the breaking news, and that this article is from Pro Football Talk. Bashaud Breeland to visit Dolphins on Sunday. Free agent cornerback Bashaud Breeland is making the rounds. Breeland, 26, is scheduled to visit the Dolphins on Sunday, Josina Anderson of ESPN reports. Breeland worked out for the Patriots earlier this week. The Ravens, Colts, Browns, Raiders, and Chiefs also have visited with him, and he met with the Cardinals in May. He signed a 3-year, $24 million deal with the Panthers in March, but Breeland failed a physical. A cut on Breeland's foot required a skin graft. A fourth-round pick of Washington in 2014, he had 58 career starts in his 4 seasons there, making 8 interceptions, 59 pass breakups, and 7 forced fumbles. Okay, and then to expand upon that a little bit more, there's a couple more articles on that topic. This is from the Phins. Dolphins to visit with defensive back Bashaud Breeland on Sunday. Although it was just the first preseason game of the year, the Dolphins defense looked lost at times on Thursday night. Second-year defensive back Xavier Howard is on his way to being one of the elite corners in the NFL, but what about the rest of the group? Cordrea Tankersley, Tony Lippett, and Torrey McTyer have all taken reps with the first team opposite Xavier Howard throughout training camp, but none of these players have separated themselves from the pack, and that is where the issue lies. On Sunday, the Dolphins plan to visit with free agent defensive back Bashaud Breeland. According to Josina Anderson of ESPN, the 26-year-old cornerback, who most recently played with the Washington Redskins, will visit the Dolphins on Sunday. Breeland signed a 3-year, $24 million deal with the Panthers this offseason. Unfortunately, a non-football injury forced the 4-year veteran to fail a physical, voiding his contract. During his 4 seasons in Washington, Breeland started 58 games. He combined for 211 tackles, 8 interceptions, and 7 forced fumbles. If signed, Breeland would immediately compete for the second spot along with Tankersley, Lippett, and McTyer. Okay, and then this one from Joe Shad's Palm Beach Post. Miami Dolphins, would cornerback Bashaud Breeland fit in as a starter? The Miami Dolphins may have a problem at cornerback, and they may be able to solve it with free agent Bashaud Breeland. Breeland plans to visit Miami on Sunday, according to ESPN's Josina Anderson. Neither Cordrea Tankersley, Torrey McTyer, nor Tony Lippett has emerged as a clear starter opposite Xavier Howard in the spring of the summer. Breeland, 26, signed a big deal with the Carolina Panthers this spring, but the deal was voided when he failed a physical after cutting his foot on vacation in the Dominican Republic and it became infected. Breeland was a 4-year starter for the Washington Redskins after he was drafted in the 4th round out of Clemson. He has 8 interceptions and 59 passes defended over 4 years, though only 1 interception last season. Here is an analysis of Breeland from Pro Football Focus. After playing mostly slot cornerback in 2016, Breeland transitioned into an outside cornerback role with Washington for a majority of the 2017 season, as he played 745 of his 856 defensive snaps, 87%. At either left or right cornerback last year. He earned a 72 overall coverage grade in the process, ranking 46th among cornerbacks with 250-plus defensive snaps in 2017. According to Pro Football Focus, on 69 throws into Breeland's primary coverage, he allowed just 49.3% of those passes to be caught and a passer rating of just 75.6 on those throws. Breeland has reportedly worked out for the Patriots and visited the Browns, Chiefs, Colts, Raiders, and Ravens. Breeland, 5'11", ran a 4.62 in the 40-yard dash at the NFL Scouting Combine, which was not ideal. Despite struggling at times against speedy receivers, Breeland has improved overall solid in coverage since entering the NFL. Former Redskins defensive coordinator Jim Haslett has cited Breeland for diligent studying off the field and toughness on the field. If there is one position the Dolphins could really use a veteran addition, it's cornerback. Lippett is recovering from an Achilles injury, and McTyer has had a strong camp but is an unproven, former undrafted free agent. Okay, so there you have it. I guess he's coming in tomorrow for a visit, so we'll see how that goes. It would be interesting for sure. And I mean, they always say you can't have enough cornerbacks, and I don't know. It would definitely make the competition a little bit more interesting, and it would definitely add more depth. So I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see what happens. I can't really talk about it too much more, I guess, until it becomes a thing. So moving on. So this is a Sports Illustrated Sports Illustrated article, and it is entitled "Robert Quinn: The Raised Fist and the Man Behind It." For Robert Quinn, a humble, quiet NFL veteran who's been raising his fist since September 2016, the gesture is meant to empower and provoke and also unite. Its roots trace back to his Carolina upbringing and for centuries before that. I want people to understand, he says, but also I won't stop until they get rid of me. All right, so here's the article. First of all, I want to make a point that I forgot to make earlier about this whole thing. And let's not forget that Kenny Stills, one of the primary protesters on our team, he does tons of work in the community in Florida. And one of the primary things he does in collaboration with Stephen Ross's RISE program, the Ross Initiative for Sports Equality, I believe it is, they have been working to try and bridge the gap between, the police force in South Florida and the citizens, and bring them together and unify them. That's what makes this, and in fact, that is one of the primary reasons why Kenny Stills was nominated for the Walter Payton Man of the Year award last season. So that's, part of what makes this whole thing about the, this whole union telling the police officers to not buy tickets. It just makes that even more ridiculous, and it just shows that apparently they don't really take that into account. They don't really care that the Dolphins try and work are trying to work with them and citizens. Apparently they don't care to come together with citizens. So Dolphins fans that live in South Florida, that's you. Your cops apparently don't want to fucking, excuse me, or at least the unions are telling them, and obviously not all cops, you can't lump them all together, but apparently the unions are telling your cops, the people that are supposed to defend you, we don't care that they try and work with us to come together with you guys. Forget about all the community service they do and stuff like that. Let's just get on them for protesting racial injustices when they're upset about getting shot for no reason. Whatever. Alright, so here we go. The first time Robert Quinn raised his fist during the National Anthem on September 12, 2016, the Rams and the 49ers were moments away from kicking off their season opener. 130 days remained in Barack Obama's presidency. Alton Sterling and Philandro Castillo had just been buried in Baton Rouge and St. Louis, respectively. Stephon Clark of Sacramento had a year and a half to live. Terrence Crutcher of Tulsa had 4 days. The white police officers who killed those 4 black men would eventually all be acquitted at trial or not prosecuted at all. By the way, at this point, I am no longer going to give you my opinions or anything. I am strictly going to read this and let it speak for itself. Receiver Kenny Britt stood with Quinn on the Rams sideline that night, each player raising a bald right hand toward the Santa Clara sky, just 10 miles from a statue on the San Jose State campus depicting Olympians John Carlos and Tommy Smith doing the same thing 48 years earlier and for largely the same reasons. On the opposite side of the field, the 49ers' Eli Harold and Antoine Bethea also each raised a fist. Eric Reed and Colin Kaepernick knelt. This was 2 weeks after Kaepernick had first been noticed kneeling in a preseason game, as pop violinist Lindsey Sterling played an uncharacteristically mournful rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. Historians will say little about the Niners winning that game 28-0, or about Kaepernick contributing just 3 handoffs in mop-up duty. They will recall more readily the events of the 2 years after those first protests. For starters, 8 weeks later, America elected as its president a man who would call these protesting players sons of bitches and rant that they should be fired. Police-involved killings, according to the Washington Post, rose from 963 in 2016 to 987 in 2017 and are on pace to exceed 1,000 in 2018. And as Football Outsiders writer Scott Kagsmar points out, Kaepernick became the first quarterback in NFL history to throw 200 passes as a 29-year-old in 2016 and then not appear on an NFL roster at 30. The former Niners quarterback remains the face of this movement, but its steadiest presence is a man born and raised in what was once the epicenter of the American slave trade who expresses his dissent while standing. Since that first moment in 2016, Quinn has raised his fist during the anthem before every game his team has played, including the 8 he missed due to injury, which makes him one of the few constants in this turbulent stretch of player protests. In March, Quinn was traded to the Dolphins, who, it was revealed in an internal document leaked last month, considered fining or suspending any player who protests this season. On Thursday night in Miami, Quinn raised his fist before the Dolphins' first preseason game against the Buccaneers, and he promises to continue raising his fist. "I won't stop until they get rid of me," he says. "That's going to be the only way to silence me." None of it, of course, matters if his message doesn't come across. Sitting at a picnic table outside the Rams practice facility last December, dressed in sweats and a beanie, Quinn lamented, "I don't know if people really know why I'm protesting." He stopped and reset himself. Its meaning starts with, I'm going to be honest, black power. Let's protect our own. But at the same time, I want to unite America. I would like for everyone to quit finger pointing about who's this and who's that. Let's all be one people. Other than raising his fist, Quinn, who's 57.5 sacks since 2012, or 8th most in the NFL over that period, is not a confident expresser of himself, which he conceded during that and subsequent interviews with lengthy pauses and comments such as, "Let me think about how to put this," and "Sometimes when I speak it comes off wrong," and "Does that make sense?" "This is important to me," he said, looking down shyly at his scarred fingers, each the size of a premature baby's arm. "I want people to understand. People still think I'm disrespecting the flag. Not just me, everyone who protests. If you're not African American, I don't expect you to relate to it. My ancestors were brought here on slave ships, treated like a fraction of a human, under a flag that was created out of wiping out Native Americans. Today, that flag tells Muslims and Mexicans, we don't want you here. We're supposed to be America, equal opportunity, equal people. But you look around and it's not like that." So he raises his fist during the anthem. It's his way of saying that the red, white, and blue spectacle preceding every NFL game hides an important lie he is not willing to tolerate, not even for 2 minutes. A raised fist, Quinn explains, is his answer to the question Francis Scott Key, a slave owner who once called blacks an inferior race of people, posed at the end of the first verse of his song about the Battle of Baltimore in 1814. "Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave, over the land of the free and the home of the brave." No, Quinn says, not every American is free. Let's start back in the day. One of the first names that pops into my head is Emmett Till, who was 14 when he was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. More recently, Trayvon Martin, who was 17 when he was gunned down by a Florida neighborhood watch coordinator in 2012. Is there any real difference between the two? Were they free? 17 months before Quinn first raised his right fist, a 50-year-old black man named Walter Scott was pulled over for a busted taillight near Quinn's hometown of Ladston, South Carolina. Unarmed, Scott fled on foot. A white policeman named Michael Slager fired 8 shots at Scott's back, including one that tore through his heart and lungs, killing him. Slager was later sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree murder. Ladson, a town of 14,000, lies 19 miles from the Charleston harbor, where an estimated 40% of enslaved Africans first set foot in North America. 200 years ago, the main cash crop here was rice, a stubborn, thirsty product that required several times the manpower of cotton, which is why, at the time of the Civil War, 14 men in South Carolina owned at least 500 slaves apiece. Most of them lived in the Low Country, where 130 years later the first dots took shape on a timeline that would inform and encourage the protests Robert Quinn engages in today. "I was walking with 2 of my cousins. We must have been 12 or 13, near my grandma's house in Monk's Corner, named for Charles Monk, a local slave owner who branded his human property. says Quinn. It was a long, empty dirt road, and a cop just randomly pulls over and says, "You look like suspects." The first time I was profiled by police, I wasn't even old enough to drive. Steve LaPrade, who coached Quinn for 4 years at Fort Dorchester High, had never heard that story before. LaPrade, whose program is a perennial supplier of FBS talent, says that when he first saw Quinn raise his fist, he felt surprise. Not that it was right or wrong, just surprise. He'd never done anything like that. LaPrade, who is white, repeats what several locals, including Quinn's own parents, remember. He never knew racism was a big deal for Robert at school. Tammy Cobbs raised her kids just down the road from the Quinns. With a laugh, she describes her family as white, Christian, conservative, homeschooled. We're probably what people would consider the opposite end, the people Robert's protesting against. And yet, her sons Brandon and Devin used to play with the Quinn kids from sun up till sundown. My boys always knew that if they wanted an overnighter with the Quinns, it was a yes. We couldn't have asked for better childhood friends for our sons. Regarding Quinn's protests, Cobb says, "I guess I was a little surprised. She never realized that racism had affected him so personally," she adds, "but that doesn't mean you can't have compassion or empathy for somebody else." Says Coach LaPrade, "I'm sure me and him don't see things exactly the same right now, but that guy, the world would be a better place if there were more Robert Quinns in it. I don't think he has an enemy in this whole Charleston area. So however you feel about what he does during the anthem, if you know Robert Quinn, you just say, 'It's Robert, so he's got a good reason.'" In San Juan, Puerto Rico, 49 years before Robert Quinn first raised his right fist, a janitor musician named Mariano Camacho Sr. messed around on his wife and got another woman pregnant. Mercedes Camacho was washing dishes when her husband came home and informed her that he'd fathered an illegitimate daughter. "It drove a stake in my mom's heart," recalls their now 63-year-old son, Mariano Jr., who was 12 at the time. Mariano Sr. didn't want the baby, nor did the child's birth mother, so he put the girl in foster care in Puerto Rico and moved with his wounded wife and 2 sons to New Jersey. When that girl, Maria, turned 9, Mariano Sr. begrudgingly brought her to the U.S., where Mercedes, still hurting, raised Maria like one of her own, says Mariano Jr., who gets choked up at this part. Maria Camacho would go on to earn a track scholarship at Baptist College in Charleston, where she met a hurdler named James Quinn. They married young and in the early 1990s bought a 3-bedroom house in Ladston for $64,000. James worked for UPS, Maria worked at Burger King. Robert, the second oldest of their 4 children, began working the drive-thru alongside Mom as soon as the law allowed. The Quinns weren't poor, but with 4 growing athletes under their roof, they were no strangers to eating Burger King for dinner either. Paintballs were expensive, says Brandon Cobbs, so Robert and I would go in the woods and shoot each other with BB guns to save money. Quinn's girlfriend throughout high school, Damara Miller, recalls that Robert didn't talk much. He never used foul language, except maybe on the field, and I didn't have to worry about other girls. He was a gentleman. No one cared that Damara was white and Robert was black, says Miller. He wanted to be a professional skateboarder, she says. He listened to white Nashville rock band Evanescence. You couldn't stereotype Robert. He hung out with everybody. Personally, I would not protest during the anthem, she adds, but if he chooses to, I support it 100%. Everyone around here knows his heart. Maria Quinn, Puerto Rican orphan turned American success story, was as surprised by her son's pregame gesture as anyone. At first I was like, "What the heck is he doing?" she says. "I asked Rob, why are you doing this?" He said, "Mom, it's my beliefs. It's what I want to do." He did say that he wouldn't kneel though. Quinn's uncle Mariano Jr. believes that delineation has to do with the 20-year-old Army career he himself embarked on after his own father moved the Camachos to the U.S. in the late 1960s. Before NFL games, Quinn stands against, among other things, the current administration's immigration policies, which Mariano happens to support. What Robert does, that's up to him, Camacho says. He's a grown man. If that's what he believes in, then I respect what he believes in. But not all of our beliefs are the same. His feelings on immigration aside, Uncle Mariano says he is fully on board with the mantra his little sister taught Robert and his siblings when they were toddlers. Help people when you can. 12 years before Quinn first raised his right fist, back when he was a Fort Dorchester freshman, a close friend of his mother's needed help. Tammy Gordon had a son, DJ, who suffered from sickle cell anemia. The child's medications affected his weight, and at age 6, DJ was already 100 pounds. Teenagers really don't want to deal with little kids, especially if they look a little different, says Tori Swain, who managed the Burger King where Maria and Robert worked, and who became one of the Quinn's closest friends. But Robert was glad to hold DJ's hand and be out in public with him. The young boy later tagged along with Robert and Demerit to prom. They mingled as a trio and had their formal photo taken together. DJ became that little guy everybody saw walking behind Robert, says Gordon. 10 years later, DJ is in high school. They still talk on the phone all the time, says Gordon, texting back and forth about homework, football, everything. Shortly after that friendship began, Robert faced a medical challenge of his own. In the fall of 2007, in training camp before Quinn's senior season at Fort Dorchester, LaPrade and his staff noticed their star defensive end was playing less aggressively than normal. The coach chalked it up to an improved O-line, but a couple weeks into the season he knew something was wrong. Why was a prospect who'd just been visited by Alabama coach Nick Saban suddenly let running backs run right by him? The only person Quinn had told about his headaches was his mom, who had already noticed that his eyes were taking on a yellow cast and that he was struggling to remember things. The day after Fort Dorchester lost to their arch rivals, Somerville High, in 2007, he was scheduled for the morning shift at Burger King. Before dawn, his parents heard a thump from upstairs, then another. Robert had passed out, risen, and passed out again. His parents found him unconscious in the bathroom. Quinn was rushed to University of South Carolina Children's Hospital, where doctors cut open the back of his skull and discovered a dime-sized tumor on his brain. They took a biopsy and inserted a tube to relieve the pressure. Suzette Shaw, Quinn's economics teacher back then, arrived at his recovery room expecting the worst. Instead, she found herself laughing. It was a children's hospital, so his bed was half the size he was, and there were cartoon characters all over the walls. Then she noticed all the tubes and monitors. He kept telling me, "It's okay, Miss Shaw." She recalls, moved to tears by the memory of this frightened man-child willing himself to smile. "It's going to be fine, Miss Shaw. Don't cry." Quinn's biopsy eventually came back negative for cancer, but doctors told him he was done with contact sports. The people of Ladstone reacted as if he'd died. On senior night, teammates wore a decal on their helmets bearing his initials. The 35-yard line was painted red, honoring his jersey number. "That was a really hard time," says Millett, tears returning 10 years later. "I just remember his mom looking him in the eye and saying, 'The devil is a liar.' That was all he needed." 2 months after having his brain tumor scraped, Quinn drove the family's dented Explorer to the state wrestling tournament, where he defeated the defending private school champion to win his third straight state heavyweight title. "The brain tumor really made me realize that tomorrow is not promised," says Quinn. "Every day I'm just happy to wake up with a smile. It humbled me, but it also made me want to do more for others, because my life was almost taken from me. Does that make sense?" 7 years before Robert Quinn ever raised his right fist, a high school running back named Lavelle Sloan was pulled off the field in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and into a cancer ward because doctors had found a tumor on his brain too. Sloan was watching college football from his bed at Duke Hospital later that fall when he heard about a North Carolina defensive end who'd returned to the game following his own brain tumor. A social worker contacted Andre Williams, an assistant at UNC. Williams approached Quinn, a 19-year-old sophomore at the time, and Robert immediately understood, says Williams. "You could tell it was very important to Robert to offer any help he could." The Tar Heels hosted Sloan at a game, and Quinn met with the boy on the field before kickoff. Later, he paid Sloan a surprise visit in his hospital room, where they were left alone to talk while relatives wept tears of gratitude in the hall. Everyone knew the boy's prognosis was bleak. "We talked football, we talked about life," Quinn told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch the following spring, slightly miffed that the paper in his new NFL city had found out about the budding friendship. "My doctor told me I was supposed to be brain dead, so I'm living testimony that a recovery can happen. I wanted to give him hope. That's all you have to cling to." Sloan fought for 4 more months, then passed away on April 14, 2010. But among the memories left behind is a framed photo that still hangs on Marilyn Sloan's living room wall, of Robert Quinn and her son. That relationship unfurled behind the scenes, the setting Quinn prefers for such outreach. When he began taking a public stance on NFL sidelines 2 years ago in a way that other people would notice, says Swain, that's when I knew it was a big deal for him. He has never been one to call attention to himself, and he has always done the right thing by other people. She pauses, but he hasn't always made the best decisions for himself. Following UNC's spring game in 2010, Quinn accepted an agent's gift of an all-expenses-paid trip to Miami, where a jeweler gave him 2 black diamond watches and a pair of matching earrings. The trip and the jewelry totaled $5,642 in improper benefits, and when the NCAA found out, Quinn and 2 other players were declared ineligible for the season. Quinn issued a statement in which he apologized to his teammates and coaches for bringing this burden upon them, but he also lied to NCAA investigators during his initial interviews. He was booted from the team, and 3 years later, during his 3rd season in the NFL, received a letter of permanent disassociation that prohibited him from contacting UNC student-athletes, from entering the Kennan Football Center, and from further embarrassing UNC and jeopardizing its commitment to full NCAA rules compliance. integrity has been damaged through your actions, the letter continued. But if you pick up the Tar Heels' most recent media guide, which is equal parts recruiting pitch and PR instrument, you'll still see Quinn listed as the recipient of the '08 Brian Piccolo Award given to the ACC's most courageous player as a member of UNC's 2011 NFL draft class and is one of the program's 24 all-time first-round picks. The disassociation knife only cuts one way, apparently. I just find these things interesting, says Quinn, who enjoys talking about the Carolina controversy as much as he likes discussing his impact on the lives of DJ Gordon and Lavelle Sloan, which is to say, not at all. But he cannot stop the stories that flow forth from the people he has touched, George Bailey-like, over his 28 years. He was injured when we won the state championship 2 years ago, says LaPrade, Quinn's coach at Fort Dorchester. He and his wife Christina flew in for the game, and afterward he handed me a $50,000 check to buy the kids rings. I didn't ask him for that. The rings ended up costing quite a bit less than $50,000, LaPrade says, and we've done a lot of good at the school with that money. A few weeks later, around Christmas, Rebecca Carter, a single mother in LA, was preparing to move into a government-subsidized apartment with her 6 kids. A refuge finally after years of homelessness and domestic abuse. She expected the unit to be empty. Instead, she found it fully furnished, filled with school supplies and groceries, with a Christmas tree and presents, all courtesy of Quinn and a teammate, Tavon Austin. Those two extended the same kindness last December to a mother of 6, Shawana Cox, who'd been displaced from 2 apartments in 2 weeks by wildfires that affected LA. There are myriad examples of Quinn's preference for discreet, direct impact over the broader political reforms sought by players like Chris Long, Quinn's friend and former Rams teammate. To that point, Tammy Gordon shares a story from the 2017 offseason. Robert had returned to Ladstone for a free youth camp that he and Fort Dorchester teammate Carlos Dunlap, now with the Bengals, host every summer. That Sunday in church, she says, DJ came running up to me saying, "Mama, Robert just texted and he said if we pack a bag right now, I can come to California with him." By the time they got home and put a bag together, Quinn was at their door, boarding passes in hand, and DJ stayed in LA with the Quinns for 6 weeks. DJ wants to play football, but his medical condition has made that dream impossible. Robert always tells him there's more to life than football, says Gordon, and DJ wants to be a chef. He likes to cook. So last summer in California, Quinn invited a culinary instructor to his home to show DJ a few things in the kitchen. I don't want to get political, says Gordon, but she does want to make it clear that Quinn isn't protesting because he hates America. He's doing it because he has a big heart. Eric Reed said earlier this year that he'd stop kneeling if he regains an NFL roster spot. Another contingent of players, led by the Eagles' Malcolm Jenkins, decided to stop protesting last November after the league pledged $89 million to various social justice platforms, although Jenkins raised his fist before Thursday's preseason game against the Steelers. Quinn has never discussed the protests with these men, but he says he hopes other players aren't afraid of making their stance because they don't want to stop making a dollar and survive. He can already hear the response from fans. Easy for you to say, millionaire. And this is where the guy who played paintball with BB guns and rode his bike to work at Burger King digs in. Let's erase money, he says. How would we function? You're growing apples, I'm growing oranges, that person over there is growing lettuce. Now we have to take care of each other. Versus, I'm your boss, listen to me, I pay you $2 and you make me 50. It's a radical vision, but it's consistent with Quinn's belief that some of America's dearest institutions need overhauling. Racism and the quest for personal gain, he says, have become too entwined in this country's roots, and in the NFL's too. From the league's spotty history regarding player safety to its clumsy responses to player protests to its lopsided hiring practices. In April, Quinn fired off a text message that cuts to the heart of that last issue, evoking the days of Thomas Monk. No black owners, barely any black coaches, players 77% black. For years, Quinn has heard the establishment tell minorities, we know, just hang in there. But for how much longer? His raised fist asks, how long can we ignore that the American experiment, freedom for all, is either a hoax or it requires far more effort than is currently being expended? This is why Quinn prefers grassroots work. This is why he and Rams tackle Andrew Whitworth quietly donated dozens of tickets to kids in a Pop Warner program in Watts last year. It's why he said yes when Rams punter John Hecker asked if he could stand next to Quinn during all those anthems with his pale hand on Quinn's shoulder to let white people out there know that it's okay to speak up, Hecker explains. Quinn's in Miami now, but his fist will stay up as surely as he will continue getting biannual checkups on the brain tumor still in his head. As surely as he keeps listening to Blessings by Lecrae and Ty Dolla $ign every morning. If I ever took a loss, I learned a lesson. If I ever think I'm better than the next man, if you woke up this morning, it's a blessing. There are disadvantages that come with having brown skin in this country, says Hecker. Being a white man, it can be difficult to see these things, but they're undeniable. The people who are affected. Rob just wants to lift those people up. That's the detail Maria Camacho Quinn says most people misunderstand about her son's pregame pose. It's not about Robert Quinn at all. It's about the people he's lifting, sometimes by the scruff of the neck, saving them, if only temporarily, from their oppressive day-to-day, an image that looks for all the world like a man raising his fist. So, with that, that's it. I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to say any more about it. You know, hopefully it doesn't come up too much. The only way I'll say anything more about it this season is if, you know, it directly affects the team in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to talk about politics anymore, but I had to get this out there, and there you have it. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope people can just take this and realize that we need to come together, we need to support each other, and we need to fix the problems together. Alright, well, with that, if you did like the video, hit subscribe, share it, you know, all that good stuff. I know this one's probably gonna not be 100% popular, so it is what it is. But in any event, fins up, let's have a good season.